The heavy doors opened without a sound. Clara stepped forward, her white dress brushing the marble floor like a whisper. Around her, silence, except for the distant echo of her own heartbeat. Guards watched from the shadows, but her eyes didn't flinch. Ahead, behind gold-framed doors, waited the man her father had sold her to. A stranger, a sheik. But Clara wasn't coming to surrender. Clara Monroe never believed in fairy tales. She grew up watching her mother scrub floors until her hands bled, while her father disappeared for days, chasing debts and illusions. When Evelyn fell sick, Clara dropped out of school to care for her, working late nights at the diner, surviving on tips and prayers. But prayers didn't pay hospital bills, and when her father returned, it wasn't with help, it was with a deal. "A contract," he said, placing a heavy envelope on the table. "He's powerful, respected. He'll take care of everything." "He?" Clara asked, her voice hollow. "Sheik Karim al-Rami." Clara wanted to scream, to run, but Evelyn, frail and fading, took her hand and whispered, "Sometimes we survive by surrendering what we love the most." So Clara went. This is the story of how she was promised like property, and became the only woman who ever made a king break his own rules. But she had no idea what waited behind those golden doors. Clara Monroe knew every crack on the sidewalks of Eastbridge. That small, sun-faded town was where she learned how to stretch a dollar, fake a smile, and lie to her mother about how full the fridge really was. She was 17 when Evelyn's diagnosis came, stage 3, and the bills started stacking like bricks in a wall with no door. She took double shifts, skipped meals, refused to cry. Clara didn't believe in breaking, she believed in enduring. But when her father, Richard, returned after nearly 2 years of silence, she felt something collapse inside. He sat at their chipped kitchen table like nothing had happened. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes darted. "There's a man," he began, avoiding Clara's stare. "A sheik. He's offering to clear everything, the debt, the treatments, all of it." Clara folded her arms. "What's the catch?" "He wants a wife." She laughed, then stopped. "You're serious?" He slid a sealed envelope across the table. The wax bore a symbol she didn't recognize, 2 swords under a crescent moon. "Karim al-Rami," he said quietly. "He chose you." Clara stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "He doesn't even know me." "He doesn't need to," Richard said. "He's not marrying you for love. He's marrying for honor. You'll be safe, respected, owned," Clara whispered. That night she sat beside her mother, who was too weak to sit up. Evelyn reached out with trembling fingers, brushing Clara's cheek. "Your father's a fool," she said, her voice barely audible. "But you're stronger than both of us. I don't want this for you. But if you go, don't let them take your fire." The next morning, a black car arrived. The driver spoke in clipped words and never looked her in the eye. Clara packed only what mattered: her mother's photo, a notebook of poems, and a red scarf Evelyn had sewn by hand. As the car pulled away, Eastbridge disappeared behind her like a dream that never quite came true. She wasn't a princess, and she wasn't afraid. But deep inside, something cracked, because for the first time Clara Monroe was no longer her own. And that's when everything began to unravel. Clara had always imagined freedom as a wide sky, somewhere far from debts, obligations, and small-town ceilings. Her secret dream was to finish school, write stories, maybe even travel. Just her and her mum, somewhere with open windows and quiet mornings. That dream shattered the moment she stepped off the private jet and into the suffocating heat of Dar Rahim. The city was a jewel buried in desert gold. Everything glittered, from the palace gates to the streets paved with stone imported from Italy. But no amount of beauty could distract Clara from what it meant. She wasn't a guest. She was an offering. The palace towered above her like something out of a myth. Long corridors of silence, eyes watching, guards at every arch. She was escorted without a word, her boots echoing against floors so polished she could see the fear in her own reflection. Her room was larger than the diner she used to work in. A bed draped in white linen, silk curtains, gold-trimmed vanity. It was gorgeous and cold, too perfect, a cage painted in luxury. She stared out the window. There were no gates in sight, no visible roads, just sand stretching endlessly into the horizon. When the knock came, it wasn't loud, just deliberate. Two servants entered with their eyes downcast, laying out a deep blue dress and a veil. "The Sheik requests your presence," one of them said, almost apologetically. Clara didn't ask questions. She dressed in silence, tying her hair back with Evelyn's scarf beneath the veil. The hall where Karim waited looked like a throne room. Arched ceilings, mosaic floors, a long carpet leading to a man dressed in black and gold. Sheikh Karim al-Rami. He didn't stand. He simply looked at her, like a man studying a painting. "You're younger than I expected," he said finally. "And you're exactly what I expected," she replied, voice steady. He raised an eyebrow, mildly amused. "They said you were bold." "I'm not here to impress you," Clara answered. "You're not here by choice," he said, rising slowly. He walked toward her, not rushed, not threatening, but with the kind of control that made her spine straighten. When he stopped a few feet away, the room felt smaller. "I honored your father's request," he said. "I'm not a cruel man, Miss Monroe, but I do expect loyalty and silence." Clara's fists clenched at her sides. "I've already given up everything. I won't give up who I am." Karim tilted his head. "We'll see." That night, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, still dressed in silk, but feeling skinless. The dream was gone. The future was no longer hers. And as the palace fell silent around her, a single truth settled in. She had been traded, and now she had to survive. The palace had no clocks, no sound of traffic, no familiar rhythm of life. Days melted into one another like the heat rising off desert sand. Clara lost track of time within a week. She wasn't mistreated. No chains, no shouting, no visible cruelty. But silence. Silence could wound deeper than fists. She was watched, escorted, managed. Wherever she went, a figure followed a few steps behind. Eyes never met hers. Words were only exchanged when necessary. The staff called her Lady Monroe, but treated her like a glass object, valuable, fragile, and never fully seen. She tried to write in her notebook, but the words wouldn't come. The stories she used to imagine evaporated under the weight of this strange golden cage. And Karim? He was everywhere and nowhere. Sometimes she'd see him from across the courtyard, giving instructions to guards, speaking with officials in hushed Arabic. Other times she'd pass him in the hall. He'd nod politely, cold and unreadable. Like they were distant acquaintances instead of two people bound by a contract neither one chose. Once he invited her to dinner. The room was candlelit, the food exquisite, but not a single personal word was spoken. It felt like sitting across from a statue carved in velvet and steel. She returned to her room that night and cried for the first time. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears on embroidered pillows, grief for her mother's decline, rage toward her father's cowardice. But mostly grief for herself, for the girl she used to be, for the woman she didn't know how to become. On the 9th night, she tried to leave. Wearing a servant's robe and a veil to hide her face, Clara snuck out through the east wing, memorizing guard rotations like pieces on a chessboard. She reached the outer gates, closed but not yet locked, and placed her hand on the latch. "Don't!" a voice said behind her. She turned. It was Karim. No guards, no shouts. Just him, standing in the shadows, his voice low and tired. "You think I would force you to stay?" he asked. Clara's voice cracked. "You already did." He took a step closer. "You think I wanted this arrangement?" She stood firm. "Then why accept it?" A beat of silence. He looked away. "Because sometimes we bury ourselves in duty to avoid feeling anything at all." She blinked. Something shifted in his tone, something wounded. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the gates. "Go. If you truly want to leave, I won't stop you." Clara hesitated. Her heart screamed run, but her legs didn't move. He watched her, quiet, expecting nothing. She turned away from the gate and walked back inside. That night she didn't sleep. She sat on the windowsill, Evelyn's scarf in her hands, staring out at the sandstorms rolling over the dunes. The desert looked like a sea in revolt, fierce and unforgiving. She whispered to the dark, "I don't know who I am anymore." And somewhere, far off in the silence, it felt like the world whispered back, "Neither does he." Have you ever felt like your voice didn't matter? Like you were present, but invisible? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes the simple act of being heard can be the beginning of healing, for you and for someone else who's quietly breaking too. The storm came without warning. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a sick shade of yellow. Servants rushed to shutter windows as the wind began howling like a wounded animal. Sand battered the glass like furious fists. The palace became a fortress against nature, but inside, Clara couldn't breathe. Storms had always unsettled her. As a child, she used to hide in the closet while her mom hummed lullabies just outside the door. But now, Evelyn was thousands of miles away, and Clara had nowhere to hide. She paced the room like a caged animal until finally, barefoot and breathless, she stepped into the hallway. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay still. Her heart thundered louder than the storm outside. She wandered toward the west wing and stopped in front of a door she hadn't noticed before. It was slightly ajar. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single oil lamp. Books lined the walls, rugs layered the floor, and a low couch sat beneath stained-glass windows. A quiet sanctuary. Karim was there, standing at the window, his face turned toward the storm. Clara froze. He didn't turn. "You hate them too," he said softly. "The storm." She nodded before realizing he couldn't see her. "They remind me I'm small." He looked over his shoulder. His expression was softer than she'd ever seen. "Same." A silence settled between them, not hostile, not cold, just quiet, the kind that fills a room with unspoken things. He gestured to the couch. "You can wait here. It's safer." Clara walked in slowly, wrapping Evelyn's scarf around her shoulders. She sat, arms crossed, breathing through the fear. Karim didn't sit. He just stood beside the window, watching the wind. Then, without looking at her, he said, "I was engaged once. Before all of this, she left when things got hard." Clara didn't respond, but her gaze softened. A long pause. "I never blamed her," he added, "but I haven't trusted anyone since." They sat in silence, storm outside, confessions within. For the first time, Clara didn't feel watched. She felt seen. She didn't know if it was forgiveness or beginning. But when their eyes finally met, she whispered to herself, "I don't know if this is real, but for the first time, I want to try." The morning after the storm, the palace felt different. Clara walked through the garden for the first time without an escort trailing behind. The air smelled like jasmine and dust. A young servant passed by and offered a quiet smile, something that hadn't happened before. At lunch, Karim wasn't seated at the head of the table as usual. Instead, he waited near the window, hands clasped behind his back. "I had breakfast sent to your room," he said without turning. "You didn't touch it." "I don't eat when I don't sleep," Clara replied, "and I don't sleep when I'm watched." He glanced at her, then nodded once. "No more guards, unless you ask." That simple phrase cracked something open inside her. It wasn't trust yet, but it wasn't fear anymore. Over the next few days, something shifted between them. Karim began joining her for afternoon tea, not in the throne hall, but in the garden. He asked questions about her town, her favorite books, her mother's laugh. He never touched her, not once. But he listened. One afternoon, she read a poem aloud. His expression didn't change, but when she looked away, she saw his hand curl into a fist, like he was trying to hold something in. The evenings grew quieter, safer. In the library, they played chess. In the courtyard, they watched the stars. She caught herself laughing once. So did he. For a moment, they weren't Sheik Karim and Clara Monroe. They were just two people from different worlds, trying to share the same air. But even as her guard lowered, a question haunted her. What happens when the walls come back up? And then he disappeared. No warning, no explanation. For 3 days, she didn't see him. Not in the halls, not at meals, not even a message. The old fear returned like a ghost dragging chains. Clara tried to brush it off, told herself he was busy, that she didn't care. But her hands shook every time the door opened, hoping it was him. On the 4th night, he appeared at her door. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes red. She stepped back. What happened? He didn't answer right away, just looked at her like she was the question and the answer. I was in meetings about the future. What kind of future? She asked. Karim swallowed hard. The kind where feelings get in the way. There it was. The wall. He was pulling back again, protecting himself. Clara turned away. So I'm a problem to solve now? No, he said, stepping forward. You're the first thing in years that's made me feel like a man. Not a name. She faced him again, her voice low. Then act like one. Don't disappear when it gets hard. His jaw clenched. You don't understand what's at stake. And you don't understand what it feels like to be kept on a leash made of silence. The words hit both of them like thunder. Karim stepped back, torn. I want to choose you, he said, but I've never been taught how. Clara's heart ached with a truth she didn't want to say out loud. Maybe he never would. But before she could speak, the phone in his pocket buzzed. He checked the screen and his face changed. There's an event tomorrow. High-ranking visitors. You'll be introduced publicly. Introduced? She asked, cold creeping back into her voice. As my intended. He paused, then added softer, if you want that. Clara didn't answer. But that night, she laid awake staring at the ceiling, wondering, what if she was enough for him, and he just didn't know how to say it. The night of the gala arrived like a slow-building storm. The palace shimmered under candlelight. Foreign dignitaries, royal envoys, and powerful businessmen filled the grand hall. Music played softly beneath the murmur of negotiations and champagne flutes. Clara stood at the top of the staircase, draped in emerald silk. The same servant who had once averted her gaze now bowed with respect. She hated the dress, not because it wasn't beautiful, but because it wasn't hers. Karim stood by the marble fountain at the center of the room, speaking in fluent French to an oil magnate from Marseille. He was poised, controlled, untouchable. When his eyes met hers across the crowd, something flickered, not possession, not power. Something that looked a lot like hesitation. A man approached her, well-dressed, handsome, too polished. "Lady Monroe," he said with a smirk, "you clean up well." She forced a smile. "I've heard the Sheik keeps his treasures under lock and key. Wonder if he realizes how easily they slip through fingers." Before she could answer, Karim was suddenly there. His hand closed around hers, not roughly but firmly, and without a word he pulled her away from the crowd, up the stairs, past the musicians, through the side corridor, and into a balcony overlooking the desert. Clara yanked her hand free. "You had no right." He turned to her, frustrated. "He was disrespecting you." "No," she shot back. "You were parading me, then acting like I belonged to you the moment someone else looked." Karim stepped closer. "I wasn't." "You were," she cut in. "And I won't be your symbol, Karim. Not your gesture of reform. Not your trophy fiancé." He ran a hand through his hair. "You don't understand what I've had to become." "Then explain it," she said, tears burning her eyes. "Because all I see is a man too afraid to feel anything real." He stood silent. Wind swept in from the desert. The silence between them crackled like dry branches. Then finally, quietly, he said, "I am afraid." Clara blinked. "I was raised to believe control was safety, that emotions were cracks in the foundation. But with you," he looked at her, eyes raw, "you make me want to lose control." Her breath hitched. "I pushed you away because I didn't think I deserved what I felt. I disappeared because I was terrified you'd see the boy underneath all this power and leave like everyone else." She stepped closer. "I saw him. I stayed." Karim's voice broke. "I want you here, not as property, not for peace treaties, but because when I look at you, I see the life I never believed I could have. He reached for her, slow and uncertain. Clara didn't move. You kissed me once, she whispered, and then vanished. This time, he said, I'm staying. Their lips met. No fire, no rush, just two people unraveling everything they were told to suppress. No thrones, no contracts, only choice. And this time, they both chose. Weeks passed. The palace no longer felt like a mausoleum of gold. Windows stayed open. Laughter echoed in the hallways. And Karim changed, not all at once, but in the way he listened now, not just to Clara, but to his advisors, to the gardeners, to the children who visited the palace clinic she helped reopen. He no longer walked ahead of everyone, he walked beside them. He cancelled trade deals that had once silenced entire villages, opened new scholarships for girls in rural provinces, rescinded dress codes that had kept women hidden. Small changes, some said. But to Clara, they were tectonic shifts. She never asked for power, but in loving her, Karim had found something stronger than legacy. Purpose. One afternoon she walked through the market in Dar Rahim, unguarded, her red scarf tied loosely around her hair. A woman touched her arm gently. Are you the one who changed him? Clara smiled. No, he chose to change. I just stayed long enough to see it. Later that evening, Karim joined her on the balcony, barefoot, 2 cups of mint tea in hand. You still scare me, he admitted, sitting beside her. Good, she said, leaning into him. Keeps you human. The stars stretched wide above the dunes. No thrones, no noise. Just 2 hearts that had learned, through fire and silence, that love doesn't rescue, it reveals. Karim had once believed that power was measured in obedience. Now he understood. Real power is in surrender, to trust, to grow, to choose love even when it terrifies you. Especially then. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've loved someone who didn't know how to love back. Or maybe you've been the one afraid to feel, to trust, to let someone truly see you. If this story touched something inside you, share it in the comments. Sometimes your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if you believe that love, real love, doesn't always come easy, but is always worth the risk, then leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. Because around here, we believe in second chances. We believe in stories that heal, and we believe that even the hardest hearts can learn to open if someone is brave enough to stay. More stories like this are coming. And who knows, maybe the next one will feel a little bit like your own.